Welcome. Good morning, friends, members, visitors to the Unitarian Universalist of the Chester River, where our mission is to inspire, inform, and support all those who seek spiritual or personal growth or a more equal or just community. We're glad you're here with us, be it in person or by Zoom. My name is Marilee Tausig. I'll be your lay leader today. And as you just had the privilege of hearing, Kate Bennett is sharing her wonderful talents in music with us. That is the Ukrainian, the bell carol from Ukraine. I think so much of that song as it gets cold, and especially this year, I think of all the people fighting the cold. We have a wonderful group of supportive people who help us put our worship together every week. Our tech team, this week we have Joy on coffee and Gail as a greeter. Everybody works to make this gathering happen. And this week we're especially, I think, lucky to welcome Maria Wood as our speaker. I'm gonna read a blurb about her, but I really feel like I should also speak from the heart about this. She's a lifelong resident of Chestertown. Many of us have come to know her as a friend, an activist, and a talented leader. Whether it was at her roles at River Arts or her choice to be one of the 3 women who challenged Chestertown to sponsor the Black Lives Matter street murals. To me, she's always been someone who lives her values, whether they're comfortable or not. When I asked her what I was supposed to say about her right now, because I think of her as my friend, she said, well, I don't know what you're supposed to say about me. And I said, well, if I just spoke the truth, I would say, whenever I'm with you, you always make me think and you always make me laugh. And she said, who could want a better bio than that? So Maria is with us, and she's speaking on this topic of intersectionality, which is a big word that I often get confused about. So I'm looking forward to having her diminish my confusion. There's a couple announcements that I miraculously have not lost. In an effort to promote our services to the wider community, your elves at PROCC, that's the public relations arm of UUCR, want to post flyers around Kent County for the eve of the Eve service. We need to share this sacred community that we have built. If you can help out, please see John Ramsey after the service, and he will give you some flyers. If you're attending via Zoom, don't forget you can click that donate button when the offertory comes. And if you're visiting for the first time, please sign the guest register in the lobby. With that, I will ask you, because I've got to go over and light the candle. But when I start to light the chalice, you guys read the words, because I won't be reading the words. Annie. Nope. I remember having a tea. All right, guys, you ready to start saying your stuff?
Yep. Say down.
We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be with us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts.
Now, if you would rise in body or spirit and join in hymn number 325, Love Makes a Bridge. The opening words today come from the experience I've had in the last couple of weeks. I don't know whether you noticed, probably didn't, nobody keeps score around here, but I haven't been in church for 3 weeks. And part of that is because about 2-ish weeks ago, I woke up and, well, about 10 minutes into the day, the entire world started swirling like a very bad merry-go-round, and scared the living daylights out of me. I heard some nods and oh no's, so I suspect you guys know what's coming. Luckily, I got to see a doctor and a physical therapist within a day and a half who diagnosed me with what my sister calls the swirlies, but that is not the technical term. It's benign positional vertigo, and there's nothing, anyway, it's vertigo. But what was really interesting for me is that it was a tough experience, and I didn't really know what to do with it, how to work through it, because it scared me. It really scared me. Until I read, as I was preparing for this service, my fave, Amanda Gordon, and she began to make me think a little bit harder about that moment of fear that I had had. And so I'm going to read a poem called Lucent from her. But essentially, what she helped me see is, you may not know this, but the physical therapist, in order to cure this, which there's really a fix, unlike many things that go wrong with us at this age, there really is a fix. But they have to treat your head a little bit like it is a pinball machine, a circular pinball machine, because there's a little crystal in there that's out of place, and they need to roll your head around until it goes back into where it's supposed to. The problem is the crystal is the absolute big boss of whether your world is coming apart. So the front of your brain and the physical therapist may say you're going to be fine. Your brain is not getting that message because that little crystal is the big boss, and it's telling you that in the fix, and I do tend to hyperbole, but I don't think I'm hyperbolizing now. When they're fixing it, it feels exactly like you're in a plane that's crashing. When the symptoms for me were like a merry-go-round, the fix was like a plane crash, and it didn't work. And then they had to do it again. And so, although it was almost a nothing kind of thing, it's not going to hurt me, it doesn't do any other bad things, for a very small period of time, I had to go through what felt like a plane crash. And then I had to do it again. And I found that I was on the very edge, much harder than, say, falling off my bike and breaking my arm and leg. For those few minutes, much harder. And then I read Amanda Gorman's poem. So after I finish the poem, I'd like us to have our moment of centering as our order of service dictates, but I won't tell you because so far I have not been able to get through this poem without cracking up. It's called Lucent. What would we seem stripped down like a wintered tree? Glossy scabs, tight raised skin. These can look silver in certain moonlights. In other words, our scars are the brightest parts of us. The crescent moon, the night's lucent lesion, we are felled oaks beneath it, branches full of empty. But look closer. What we share is more than what we have shed. And what we share is the bark, the bones. Paleontologists from one fossilized femur can dream up a species. They can make believe a body where there was none. Our remnants are our revelation. Our requiem is our rapture. When we bend into dirt, we are truth preserved without our skin. Lumen means both the cavity of an organ, literally an opening, and a unit of luminous flux, literally a measurement of how lit the source is. Illuminate us. That is, we too are this bodied unit of flare, this gap for lux to breach. Sorry, it must have been the light playing tricks on us, we say, knuckling our eyelids. But perhaps it is we who make falsities of luminescence, our shadows playing tricks on stars. Every time their gaze tugs down, they think of us monsters, then men, predators, then persons again, beasts, then beings, horrors, then human. Of all the stars, the most beautiful is nothing more than a monster just as starved and stranded as we are. This is the time that we share our concerns, on our joys, and our acknowledgments of the heart. I will be lighting a candle for those of us who have lived with COVID, survived COVID, helped others through it, and those who are grieving, for those we've lost in the pandemic, and all of us who experience loss and grief in this season. So I invite you up to share at the microphone, and I will, because I finally lit a candle, I will light another candle.
So I'm filled with joy because of the wonderful event we had on Friday night, and I'm so grateful for all the wonderful committee of Mary Pritchard, Lynn Dolinger, Linda Dutton, and all the soup chefs and the bakers and the people that supported the soup sampler supper and sale. And finally got that. And I think we're going to clear about $1,200. So well done, everyone. Thank you.
It was great.
I just feel a lot of gratitude this morning for when Kate began playing, and that song brings so much emotion, and I looked around and everybody was just in their place. And my thoughts went to Bill Lindsay, dear Bill Lindsay, who played for us, and Joan, and of course Philip, and now Michael, and all the guests, including Kate, who have filled this sanctuary with their gift. It's just been such a blessing.
I just want to mention the name of our friend, Jack Fancher, passed away this last week. And he was a friend of the community for so many years, and I haven't seen him at all recently, but I have great memories of going to Anguilla with him painting when I was back early here, living here, and he and Barbara are just wonderful folk, and I just wanted to mention his name today.
Well, this is a simple joy, but my now 18-year-old grandson, who I still wasn't he a baby yesterday, got accepted to 5 of the schools that he applied to for college, so he's kind of flying high. So are we, very proud of him.
For all who have spoken and for the thoughts and joys and concerns that we hold in our heart, let us have a moment of silence. We're lucky enough to be able to contribute to this community, so I'll be passing the baskets, and anybody on Zoom can hit that donate. Please join me in the responsive reading that you'll find in the back of your gray hymnal, number 584. It's called A Network of Mutuality, and it's written by Martin Luther King Jr. I'll read the stuff in the regular font if you would read, as a congregation, the print in italics. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and ignorance can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
Foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a physical goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
You shall do well in the mountains of the
And now we welcome Mariah Wood.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Marilee, for that beautiful introduction. I truly have never been more flattered than to hear you say that I make you both laugh and think. And I also want to just say how wonderful it is to hear live music. I still haven't had that experience that many times in our post-COVID world, and it It is such a wonderful feeling. I'm really happy to be here today, and I hope that what I say can be the beginning of a conversation that continues beyond this room. So back in 2019, I was invited to come here and speak about social justice, about what an essay written by Ta-Nehisi Coates called "The First White President" might have to say to us here in Chestertown about social justice. We were so young then, weren't we? 2019 just seems impossibly distant and long ago now. It was before COVID. It was also before Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed, before the idea of murals on High Street was even conceived, much less the whole process that we all went through together, and that really wonderful community dialogue and journey that we took to get to where we are now with murals on streets and a lot of positive responses to that. So when Annie Lavin reached back out to me again a few months ago to re-invite me to speak about social justice, I admit I had kind of forgotten about the earlier plans, but I was really happy to reschedule, and I started to think about how to talk about social justice now in what feels like an entirely different moment. Because as we all know, everything that I just mentioned is just a fraction of the era-defining events that we've lived through since that time. 2019 was before January 6th. It was before girls in Afghanistan lost the right to go to school. It was before the ongoing but relatively low-grade conflict on the Crimean Peninsula became a significant European land war and a large-scale refugee crisis and an ongoing attempted genocide against the Ukrainian people. It was before Mahsa Amini was killed for letting her hair show in Iran, triggering nationwide protests with the rallying cry, "Women, Life, Freedom." And it was before the United States Supreme Court handed down decisions removing a constitutional right from half of this country's population and suggested that it also might like to reconsider other constitutionally protected rights enjoyed by various segments of our population. And that's not all, but you don't need me to go on. And I promise this sounds like it's a downer of a talk, but I'm going to try to bring us back to a place of hope. Everything that I've listed so far, in one way or another, is related to a struggle for social justice. And they've all been competing for my attention as I've been thinking about what I wanted to say here today. Because while we've all come to understand that interesting times, like what we're living through, can be overwhelming, scary, and hard, they also give us an opportunity. Interesting times are what shake things up, and when things are shaken up, scripts can change, and status quos can change, and the question is, what is going to change, and how is it going to change, and what are we going to all do to move it in a direction? And we get to choose what that direction is. There are no, pre-written scripts for where we will end up. I think as somebody who grew up in a time when we were sort of told that history was over and we knew where things were going and how they were going to be, it's very disorienting to see that things can go backwards, things can go in new directions, things that we thought would never happen again can happen again. But it's also an opportunity. I believe that we all have a responsibility to engage in the change and to support those who move humanity closer to the goal of social justice in all its meanings and all its permutations. I do have to confess that I feel like I'm less qualified today to speak about social justice than I was 3 years ago. The world feels more complicated, and I fear that my message to you today might be a little bit less coherent than it would have been in 2019, back in the before times, because the world feels less coherent and it's more complicated, or at least we're more cognizant of the complications. But I don't think I'm alone in that feeling, and so I think that those complications are what make it even more important to have these conversations. So today, what I would like to do is to just kind of think through some questions about what social justice means to us here today in Chestertown, and, you know, rippling out from here, because we feel isolated and we feel like we're a separate space in the world, but we're not, we're connected. So how can we move closer to heeding the advice of the teacher, author, artist, and activist Louisa Tisch to work through the human impulse of division and polarization and move toward greater social justice? We do have to fight against our nature in some ways. It's not that we are moving away from chaos and towards what we're meant to be. We're creating order out of chaos, and that's the struggle. So there is a tendency to use the term social justice almost interchangeably with racial justice here in the United States, especially here, because racial oppression and violence are so deeply embedded in our history. They literally created this country, and they're at the root of much of our wealth and our standard of living and our national identity in some ways. We know that, and racism remains undeniable and present in the minds of Americans. This is something that Jane Elliott, who more or less invented diversity training, proves elegantly when she tells American audiences that she wants every white person in the room who would be happy to be treated as this society generally treats our Black citizens. If you would be happy to receive the same treatment that our Black citizens do, stand up. How many people stand up? We all know. We knew it in 2019, just as we've always known it. I mentioned earlier the essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates that I would have spoken about in 2019. It was about Donald Trump and why he was the first white president. After Barack Obama, the president of the United States was no longer automatically white. And so Donald Trump was in some ways the first white president. We all know that the national legacy of racial oppression and violence that Ta-Nehisi Coates described in this essay as the bloody heirloom remains immediate and urgent. That's true here in Chestertown. It was true in Minneapolis. It's true in Atlanta. It's true everywhere. And although many of us hoped for a moment that the Obama years would mark the beginning of a post-racial America, Coates reminded us that even after a Black president, indeed strengthened by a Black president, racism remains, as it has since 1776, and I would say before, at the heart of this country's political life. This isn't new information. It's not new to us in this room. It's not new to the public. It's not new to history. Anti-racist abolitionists like Elizabeth Henrik and Lydia Child knew it in the early 19th century. Benjamin Lay argued so passionately and demonstrated so dramatically against it in the mid-1700s that his admirers kept pictures of him in their homes for the next 100 years or longer. And we've made some progress, slow, painful progress, with periods of backsliding intermingled with steps forward. We may be in one of those backsliding moments right now, but despite the progress, if I can just coin a phrase, if we can put a man on the moon, why can't we seem together to get rid of something as destructive and pointless and painful as racial injustice and inequity? So it's understandable that when we talk about social justice here in the United States, we're speaking often about racial issues. But there are also other kinds of social injustice, other spaces of oppression and violence that exist here and that need acknowledgement as well. I would add to Coates's framing that Donald Trump might have been our first male president. Think for a moment about what that means to women. I loved Barack Obama, and I thought he was a wonderful president, and I was so happy when he was elected. And when he was elected, I also understood that this country, as heavy as that bloody heirloom of racial oppression and violence is, was willing to accept a Black president before we could accept a female president. In 2016, we were willing to accept not just a racist president, but one who was credibly accused of sexual assault. And not all of us were willing to accept that, but we live in a society where we respect our institutions. We hope that continues to be the case. And so that tells us something about where we are and who we are. And it tells us something about what we have to do. It gives us a task list, so to speak. So we know also that there are so many other things that we could mean by the words social injustice. We can name them. We all know them. Homophobia and transphobia, anti-immigration sentiment, religious discrimination and persecution, disability. It's there's an entire constellation of ways in which our society could be more just. And all of these spaces of social injustice are based on a zero-sum assumption that is rarely questioned. If we attend to anti-immigrant sentiments, we have to ignore homophobia and transphobia. If we address socioeconomic ways of oppressing and discriminating against our fellow citizens, we have to let anti-Semitism flourish. If we do anti-racism work, we have to let go of feminism. I think that Marilee's crystal in her ear and that feeling of being in a plane crash is why we resist the changes that I'm talking about. It feels so destabilizing and it feels so frightening to consider the idea of making a change in the way that things have always been and interrogating ourselves to find out the ways that we feel ourselves separate and the security that that brings us. So intersectionality is a word that is just jargon, and it's a buzzword that sounds more complicated than it is. You may remember the old chant, "The people united will never be defeated." That's a pretty good definition of intersectionality. It just means understanding and acting on the reality that the zero-sum game is a fallacy. It's mistaken logic. It's a lie. And it's a lie that's actively engaged in obstructing progress. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, poor people, religious minorities, disabled people, everyone at every nexus of social injustice has to work together. And everyone at every nexus of privilege has to work together. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also the only way that it can work. We have seen for the 400 years that we've been here, more or less, that separating ourselves from each other doesn't work. So we have to be willing to say, you have different ways of oppressing this person versus this person, me versus you, but that doesn't matter. I come from a world of folk music, specifically children's music. And we used to sing a song by Malvina Reynolds called Magic Penny that explains it pretty well. And some of you may know this song, I don't know. But I'd like to sing it. And I hope that you sing it with me. And I didn't know that there were going to be people on Zoom, but if you're on Zoom, I hope you sing it on Zoom. It's pretty easy. That's one good thing about children's music. So, love is something, if you give it away, give it away, give it away, very easy. Love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. Love is something, if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Oh, love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. It's just like a magic penny. Hold it tight and you won't have any. Lend it, spend it, and you'll have so many. They'll roll all over the floor. Love is something, if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Oh, love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. Thank you for indulging me. I love singing with people. That felt good, and I was gonna stop, but you guys wanted to do that second chorus, so I'm glad we did. I used to sing that to my daughter, and it was my way of annoyingly conveying to her that there's enough justice for everyone, there's enough, maybe not this one pie, but there's enough pie for everyone. And that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid that there's not enough, but that's not true. It's hard to let go of our categories and our divisions. It means fighting against our nature. We're tribal, right? We find safety in groups who are like us, and that's natural, but it doesn't help us today. It won't ever be perfect, because life isn't perfect and we're not perfect, and if we're striving for perfection, we're never gonna get there. But it's not unattainable. Just the other day, there was a lovely example of it. When the family of Paul Whelan refused to frame Brittany Griner's release from Russian prison as a loss, even though they have their own pain at not having Mr. Whelan back. We've seen it for almost 10 months in Ukraine, where the people of that country have come together to say, the rest of the world thinks that we're fractious, thinks that we are not united, thinks that we are not one people. but we are, and we're not going to let this bully destroy that. And that strength is what we need here. Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers in Ukraine, they're coming together. They have come together. And that's what we need to do here today. I have been volunteering for the last several months with a program called Engine, which pairs up English learners inside Ukraine with English speakers. And you just get on Zoom or whatever and have a conversation for an hour a week, or we do it for 2.5 hours because an hour is a really long time to speak a language that you don't speak very well, and it's tiring. And I have made friends with this young man in Ukraine named Vanya, who is living through this war. He's luckily in a western region of Ukraine, so he's not, under attack on a regular basis. But frequently, when I log on to my Zoom and I see him, he's in the dark. And I said, how can you be on the internet if you don't have electricity? And he said, oh, well, I have to show you this thing that I made. And he showed me this little white box with cords coming out of it. And it's a device that allows him to hook his router up to a power bank, basically, to a battery. And so he can be online even when the power is out, which it is 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And he speaks to me in, very halting English, but his communication is so clear. And he is so clear about the lines that he's living with and the fact that he just has to live through it. And we all just have to live through it. And so I think that when we hear words like intersectionality, it feels challenging and it feels maybe a little bit threatening because it starts to feel like change, and nobody likes change, even change for the better. But I would encourage us all to think of the ways in which intersectionality, or the magic penny, is working visibly, even now in this difficult time, to let that love roll all over the floor. And I would look forward to talking more later with people who have seen this. I want to hear what other people have thought about this topic. So thank you very much. Thank you, Marilee. And I don't know, I'm happy to be here, I think.
Thank you.
We're so lucky. Would you join me and rise in spirit or body for hymn number 224, Let Christmas Come? Christmas come, its story told, when days are short. So when Mariah was speaking, I realized that I had told you the story of the crystal in my ear, but I didn't really get to the point, which was, it turns out all kinds of people have crystals in their ear. This happens a lot. I bet it's happened to some of us. And as usual, when my body falls apart, as it does these ages that we're in, I called the people I'm genetically related to and asked my brother and sister. They both had it. They'd never mentioned it. My brother told a story that the physical therapist asked him to fall off the back of a table, and she promised that she would catch his head before it hit the floor. And he did it. And the reason I told you that story was the reason that Mariah mentioned about Paul Whelan, about all the people who have a wound, an opening, as Amanda Gorman called it, lumen. But we don't share it. And I got really mad at my brother and sister. I said, why didn't you tell me? But we were raised on a cattle ranch, and we're supposed to not have wounds in our family. And I think we all were kind of raised on some kind of societal cattle ranch where we're supposed to cowboy up. So, inspired by what Maria said, I would like to ask just two or three of us, if anybody has something that's been difficult for them that they could share, that helped them understand someone else. Because we don't have to be in those little categories of identity, because we've all had moments where things weren't fair or were scary. So if anybody can think of a time that their own experience helped them make a bridge to somebody else's difficulty, that would be a great way for us to reflect.
Yes. I kind of had one back when I was private in the Army, just now and then. I did some, I think I read a letter when I wasn't supposed to read a letter. So they made me work in child KP, extra KP. And the other guy and myself cleaned out the grease trap. You know, it's a nasty job. So anyway, he was black from New Orleans. And for him, we started talking about Mardi Gras. I said, oh, just don't go out then. Just don't go out in Mardi Gras. See the difference? To me, it would be a big party, but to him, it was a threat. And I had not associated with, college students come from a nice rural, farming neighborhood. I never had considered the possibility that something like that would be an intimidation, that he would see this as a big white party as intimidation. And I heard of something else. I don't know if Bob heard about this or not, but some guy had pigment treatment, so he was black. And I think it happened in the 50s, something like that. Wouldn't it be something with every guy, instead of putting 2 years in the military, that would be 2 years as a black man? So.
I'm not really sure what I'm going to say, but I just feel like I thank you, Mariah, for all those wonderful words. And I just feel like our last 3 years has changed so much that I'm now thinking back to when I was doing much more social justice work with the LGBTQ community and all those beautiful people I met. And some of them are married and just all kinds of things that enriched my lives, and I still follow and know about those folk, but I don't know anyone right now. I'm really distant from that community of people, and people still ask me about things, and I go, I really don't know. I feel like I'm really out of touch. And then even recently, I went on the bus trip to Alabama with that wonderful crowd of folk, and I got to know a lot of them and enjoy them, and it was comfortable, it was fun, and but I have not seen them much at all since. Part of that's me staying home, not going out to Mary's Stream, but some of it's I'm also not online a lot, I can't see very well, And so this isolation that we create is really inhibiting. It's made me feel separate. So it's just that there's a reality to what our everyday lives do in terms of intersectionality or not. And I'm not sure what the answer is. Online, I don't think is helping, but it's a method. So I don't know. I just feel a kind of a push and a pull.
Sometimes I think that saying I don't know is the best way to start a conversation.
Hi, new to the community. So the thing that I would think to share is I ended up being a COVID long hauler for 14 months, and I'm a nurse practitioner. And so being able to explain how it felt, what I went through, and help others was a huge gift. So now every time I get sick, and I should say this for many years, I'm like, oh, this is more data from my patients. So, but I keep now asking for no more data. I'm good.
I think we can both all identify with that. Thank you so much, especially thank you, Mariah. Now, the last part of our service, I always get it a little bit wrong. I'm going to give you some closing words, and we're going to extinguish the chalice. Thank heavens I don't have to have more matches. And you're going to read out loud because I'll be extinguishing the chalice. And then we're going to do our sung benediction, which will be harder because Philip is not here, so let's summon our energies. And then we're going to have Kate play us out with a postlude. The closing words are, let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. Mary Oliver.
Light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, we carry in our hearts until we